Hey, what's going on, everybody? Indie Pride here with Milk and Cookies Total War, and I am joined by LKHero. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hi everybody, I'm Hero.
And do you want to quickly go over what you did for Blizzard and a couple other things just so that people understand you're someone worth listening to?
Sure. So I've been working in the game industry for 10 years professionally. Before that, I just played a lot of games as a top player for a lot of different RTS titles, and I also did a lot of balance mods for their games. And I was essentially a balance tester for a lot of their games. I did stuff for Dawn of War, did stuff for Company Heroes, and Age of Empires 3, and some other titles here and there. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do. And then right now I have my own Twitch channel that I like playing a lot of different RTS games on, and just having a good time.
Yeah, he's a pretty talented Total War Warhammer player as well. So basically, there were a couple big announcements I wanted to make before we get into the meat of this video. The first is on Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 2 p.m. GMT, I believe. There is going to be the second Total War Warhammer ESL one-on-one Community Cup. So what that means is myself and Agony Achilles are going to be streaming on the official Twitch stream, Total War Official. I'll leave the link in that to that Twitch stream in the description. Um, and we're just going to be going through the entire tournament, casting as many matches as we can, and we're going to be on the official Twitch stream, so we're going to get a pretty decent amount of viewers. I want you guys to show up and support if it's something that you're interested in. If you're interested in the esports side of Total War Warhammer, definitely something that we need to support because the more viewers we get on stuff like this, the more likely it is that CA is going to want to post on social media about it. The more likely it is that they're going to want to support it. Avatar Conquest mode, maybe DLC later down the line, or in the second or third game of the trilogy. We want those features. We want that support from Creative Assembly. So the more people show up, the more likely it is that we're going to be getting a good thing going for this community. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is going to be the meat of the video, is Hero, myself, Agony Duck, and Agony Achilles have been going through a chain email together talking about balance issues. I did tell you guys that I sent an email to CA Dogbert and a couple of other CA employees just kind of illustrating a long list of patch notes, UI issues that we want to get changed, obvious stuff like showing kills on the post-battle screen, that kind of thing, but then much more in-depth in terms of balancing stuff out, kind of getting away from the current meta, making it a little bit more interesting and more fun, and focusing more on the battles rather than the Lord sniping at the beginning. So first things first, let's go over what the tournament rules are, and we can talk about those a little bit, and then we'll get into the patch notes and kind of discuss what we think are the ways to improve the game. And then I have another announcement a little bit later on, if I can remember to get to it, that will basically be if Creative Assembly doesn't support multiplayer the way we want them to, we have other avenues to pursue. So we'll get into that a bit later. This will probably be a kind of longish video because there's a lot to talk about. But first, going over rules. The sign up is here on this link. Again, this will be in the description. You can sign up. There are 56 players right now. And I would think that maybe 64 might be the cap, but I have also heard that there won't be a cap for this tournament. So as long as it's an even number of players, we might be able to do it anyway. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, to be honest, but sign up if you want to be a part of this tournament. And yeah, so let's look at the rules here. So tournament settings: best of 3 until semifinals, best of 5 on semi and finals. So with the faction rule here, that's once a player uses a faction in a series match, he can't use the same faction again in the same best of 3 or best of 5 series. I think that's a pretty interesting rule because that means that you're going to have to see a lot of the factions get played. You're not going to just be seeing Vampire Counts and Empire in every game, which I think is probably a good thing. It'll be cool to see Bretonnia. It'll be cool to see Chaos. It'll be cool to see Dwarfs because right now they're not getting a whole lot of play at the highest level of competition in Total War Warhammer. And then we have this map pool. So what do you think of the that rule right there where you have to change your faction every game in a
I,
series?
I, I think it's a fantastic role. I think it really does showcase player skill beyond the actual faction itself. I think it also shows a lot of the army diversity, and I think it also shows CA, especially kind of like which armies are obviously standing above the rest, and which units are going to be more effective in battle, and basically just which factions are out there that are more prominent in a more competitive scene. The thing that I really enjoy about this particular format that you guys are trying out is that it really allows a player to demonstrate his proficiency with every single faction out there, right? And not just selecting kind of like the meta of the week or whatever, and then playing with that. He's definitely able to showcase his skill as a more well-rounded player.
Yeah, the only potential downside is that someone, and there are people that main factions. That was obviously a thing in the tabletop. It's a thing in Total War Warhammer. They only play vampire accounts. They only play Bretonia, that kind of thing. That can be bad for them, and I can understand why a player like that wouldn't want that rule. But I think you're right. I think in early tournaments like this, it's important to showcase the diversity of the game and show off all the factions and all the strategies that one can employ. And so, yeah, forcing people to pick different factions and go into a game set knowing that they're going to have to change their faction up and they can't just spam Empire throughout the entire tournament. I think that's probably a good thing. Other things,
for sure.
yeah, we're turning off battle realism mode. This is good for casters because the tooltips don't show up when battle realism mode is on, and it's really hard to see like what spell is getting cast on someone. You can eyeball it. Fate of Buna is obvious when you see it going off. Spirit Leech is obvious when it's going off, but there are some spells that aren't quite as obvious. So being able to have the tooltips and being able to move the camera throughout the entire map if you don't have debug camera on is going to be nice. And then,
Well, not to mention, you can also talk about stats.
yes,
As you actually play and like the battlefield conditions. What kind of effects that they're under, whether or not a unit is actually behaving like how they're behaving in the battlefield. Are they routing? Are they broken? And just a lot more info for the casters to really talk about the game.
yeah. So I think that's good. I don't really know why it was turned on for the first tournament. I think that was maybe just by accident. But anyway, so army rules. There is a maximum use of 6 of the same unit. So if you want to bring 6 greatswords, you can. That kind of thing. I think 6 is okay across the board. There are a couple units that are problematic, but we're dealing with them in this rule set, which is good. So Demigryph Knights, obviously that is the meta for the Empire, one of the metas. Empire is an extremely versatile faction. We'll talk about that a lot in this video, I think. But they're limited to 2 units of Demigryph Knights, so they can only bring 2 Demigryphs with halberds or a mix of lance and halberd units. Cat to 2, I think that's good. They're a really powerful unit, obviously, but there are counters to them when they're capped to 2. I think it's a good rule. It doesn't completely gimp the Empire. They can still bring these powerful units, but when you're not bringing 6 of them or 4 of them, they become a lot easier to counter. A Fate of Buna is going to take one of them down to like close to low HP, so that's a good
Yeah,
rule.
yeah. I think a 2 cap on Demigryphs it's pretty good for the game because right now their performance compared to their price it's a little bit over the top when you can consider how Empire, like you said, is a very versatile faction. It seems to have answers to almost everything that we see in the meta so far. So yeah, them capped at 2 is a good choice.
Yeah. And then Crypt Horror is limited to 2 or to 4 units. In every VC game I casted in the tournament, which was 4 of them, I think. Actually, I think I only casted 3 games with VC in it. But I was watching the tournament beforehand, and every single player was bringing 4 or 6 Crypt Horrors, usually 6. That's
Yeah.
because they're extremely cost effective. They only cost 800 gold to field. They have a ton of armor, really good regeneration. They have high armor piercing, high weapon damage, and poison attacks. And with all of that for only 800 talents, that's
And their
pretty
and their
insane.
attacks are AoE, and
Yeah.
because they're classified as monstrous infantry, they knock units down too on the charges. Just they're very very solid units. Really really high just versatility and staying power, which is really huge for vampire accounts.
Yeah, you mix them in with skeletons or zombies, and they're just going to be going to work on units. So I think that's a good cap. Wouldn't even mind seeing them a little bit, maybe like they're not as good as Demigryph Knights, so capping them to 2 might be a little bit ridiculous. And a couple of the other rules are already gimping vampire counts a little bit, so it's probably fine to be at 4. It's not a bad rule, but they'll definitely need to be addressed in the patch, and we'll talk about that. Heroes are limited to 2 units. Generals do not count this number. Okay, so that is actually different. Oh, never mind. Okay, so heroes are limited to 2, so you could bring 2 witch hunters, which is fine. But what you can't do is bring more than 1 Lore of Death caster. So a really common thing in the Vampire Counts meta right now is bringing Manfred von Karstein and 2 Vampire Ladies. Basically, that gives you a ton of aerial superiority. You're always going to have a unit somewhere on the map on a Hellsteed with a ton of mobility that's able to cast Spirit Leech on an important target. And Spirit Leech is very easy to spam. It costs, what, 6, 7 wins of magic?
Yeah,
So
it costs 6 wins.
And it's really low cooldown. So being able to have a Vampire Lady here, a Vampire Lady there, and then Manfred circling around, Spirit Leeching stuff, it's pretty ridiculous. The ability to snipe units is pretty crazy. So limiting Lore of Death casters to 1, I think, is good. It does mean that Vampire Counts in this rule set is a little bit more gimped compared to Empire, and I still think that Empire might be a better faction. So overall, that might be a bit problematic, but then again, there's the rule that you can only play Empire once in an entire series. So I think the rule set kind of melds pretty well together. I think it'll be interesting, and yes, we're unfortunately going to be seeing plenty of games tomorrow that will be revolving around the meta of general sniping. There's going to be plenty of that, but hopefully when Bretonia and Chaos get thrown in there, there will be less of it. Of course, Greenskins and Chaos both have Lore of Death as well, so there will be Spirit Leeching, but the final rule, and I haven't touched on this, is one that me and Achilles came up with when we were talking to Men of War, who's the guy hosting the tournament. We are bumping unit health and unit size to Ultra, which means that Spirit Leech and Magic Missiles will do less damage and hopefully put less of an emphasis on gen sniping, because a Spirit Leech is going to take 5 or 6 casts on an enemy lord to kill him if you're just using Spirit Leech. And if it was on large, it would take 3 or 4 to kill him. So it'll make it harder to snipe.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that's a step in the right direction, because we really want to eliminate the prospect of someone spending all their wins just to kill an enemy hero, right? I mean, an enemy general right off the top of the game, and making it so that everyone basically has to play with like -10 morale and the rest of the entire army. So, I mean, having like let's say like someone just has superior wins. Like sometimes, as you saw in the previous tournament on ESL, and I watched the entire thing, there was some games where someone just led off with just more wins, and because they had more wins, they would cast several castings of Spirit Leech, and the other person because he had low wins, he could only cast a little bit. So I think this really does round it out, and the limitation to Lore of Death in general is just going to make it a lot better.
Yeah, I think it's a really important rule because. All right, here, I think most of us have the same problem with the meta right now, and we can talk about what the meta is right now. So, the meta for Vampire Counts is very clear. You bring a lot of Lore of Death casters, and you run in with Crypt Horrors and zombies and skeletons as meat shields and tie them in with the Crypt Horrors, and the Crypt Horrors are just going to go to work. But all the while, and this is how most games start, is you'll have 2 or 3 Lore of Death casters fly across the battlefield. They're all on Hellsteeds. You really want to have that mobility, and you're basically going to have a magic battle at the start of the game where you're spamming Spirit Leech on each other. And it's not just Spirit Leech. It also works in with Shen's Burning Gaze, the Light Wizard magic missile. It also works with Gaze of Nagash, the Vampire Counts Lore of Vampires magic missile. There's a lot of the meta right now completely revolves on the first 45 seconds of the game where you try to snipe the enemy lord. And if you're Vampire Counts, or really any faction, but especially Vampire Counts, if you lose your lord early on in a game, it's pretty much over. It's a massive blow. Like, you're getting a huge morale debuff. That crumbling is going to start right away. As soon as your guys get into melee, they're going to be crumbling. It makes it really hard to win, and I don't think any Total War fan really wants games to revolve around those opening moves like that, because it's not focusing on the battle itself. Magic should be something that helps you turn the tide of battle in your favor. A good Purple Sun, in one instance where they're really blobbed up, could turn the battle in your favor. But nobody wants to see, or at least I personally don't want to see, you lose the game 45 seconds in because someone ran forward and Spirit Leech you 3 times. It's not really interesting to watch. It's not really exciting to watch, and we don't want that to be the meta.
It's also not very skillful. Like having to overcast, Spirit Leech, bumping it up to 7, but I mean, that 7 cost, right? And then that extended range really reaches out there and does damage to someone based on a click. I mean, because Total War Warhammer does not have the original tabletop casting with power dice and the enemy having a chance to dispel it, it's more like you just point and click technically, and no one wants to really have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's not very skillful. It's not super exciting to watch. So I think most of us agree it's not the best thing for the meta. We want the battles to focus on the battles themselves, with Magic being something that can turn the tide of battle in your favor, but not be the battle itself. So with that said, that's the rules for the ESL tournament. Again, please show up on that Twitch stream. It's probably going to be going for like 4 or 5 hours, so I don't expect anyone to stick around for the entire thing, but we'll do our best to cast it, and I think it's going to be an exciting tournament. Hopefully not too many of the games revolve around the general sniping, and hopefully the rule set that we came up with is going to mitigate some of that. So let's go on to the patch notes that Duck, LKHero, myself, and Agony Achilles have been discussing, and what we have sent to Creative Assembly to Dogbert and some of these other people. Now, let me be clear, Dogbert is not the one who's patching the game. There are a million other people at Creative Assembly who are the ones that are going to be deciding what gets incorporated. Some of this might get incorporated, some of it might not. None of it might get incorporated. So we really don't know. Never put pressure on Dogbert or anybody else, any of those employees, to be like, "Oh, Indie Pride sent you this. You should have done that." I don't want to see any of that, like putting pressure on Creative Assembly employees. This was just our suggestions. Maybe not all of them are right, but I'd say that between the four of us, we have a pretty good understanding of Total War and a pretty good understanding of game balance and how to make multiplayer more exciting. So hopefully they'll incorporate some of these things.
Right. We've also spoken to more than just, it's not just us four. We've also reached out and spoken to other players who participated in the tournament, have also played the game a crap ton. We basically analyzed their feedback as well, and we were able to come up with a general consensus.
Okay, so let's read the preface here. This information has been compiled from feedback from various members of the competitive TW community, like you just said. We've been discussing it in detail. There are obviously key balance issues that need to be addressed that are reducing the overall enjoyment of the multiplayer experience. And we feel that there are certain units, I think most of you guys can guess which ones those are, that are underperforming, and certain ones that are overperforming for their cost. So we want to address those and see what we can do to improve the overall metagame and make multiplayer more fun. That's the most important thing we can do right now, is make multiplayer as fun as possible and hopefully get Creative Assembly's support on that so that we can grow this community. So let's go down here to multiplayer issues. You want to go over what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of multiplayer right now, about the meta, what you want to improve in the game?
Well, I think one of the things that stands out like a sore thumb, and you can see this all over the forums as well, on TW Center, and you can see it on official forums as well, and just all the debates and all the talks have been kind of around unit spamming, right? Like either hero spamming or like the fact that you can take 6 or 8 units of crypt horrors, or just an entire army composed of nothing but white knights on black steeds. I mean, these are the things that kind of the community has brought up, and we should probably just talk about our suggestion. I don't think that this should be the case. I think there should be a soft cap, kind of like how it was in Total War Medieval, in which case that if you have 4 of like a special unit, or what we consider like a rare unit, if you have more than 4 of those, then they will cost more. So it doesn't really limit the player. If he wants to take more, he can, but he has to pay a premium for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good rule. Did Duck tell you whether that's actually possible to implement in multiplayer? I can't remember.
No, not in its current phase.
Okay, so that would have to be something that CA changes on their side of things. I don't expect to see soft cap introduced anytime soon. I think this suggestion is unlikely, but I think from a multiplayer perspective, it can be a very good thing, because look, we're seeing plenty of builds that are like 7, 8 giants, and while that can be fun to pull out occasionally, yeah, you should have to pay a premium for it. If you're spamming giants,
or call Franz and 7 demis.
Yeah.
Like
that there should be a kind of cap on that makes it so that, look, you can bring more of those if you want. You have to pay extra for it. It was in Medieval too. It could be implemented again. I think it's a pretty good idea for multiplayer, and there are lore justifications for it. 8th edition rulebook limited special rares and specials and rare units, so you can't have 4 of the same, that kind of thing. So I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. Those incremental percentage based increases to cost of a unit can be a good thing. The look, the obvious things right now are in the metagame are demis, are crypt horrors, are magic. Personally, for me, I'm much more focused on getting rid of the lord sniping at the beginning of games. I think that is the worst part of the meta at the moment and the most boring thing to watch. I would much rather watch 4 demis run around than watch a lord die 30 seconds into a game and have the game be over right then. Because with demis, yeah, they're really good unit. Yes, they're too cost effective. Yes, they cost too little for the amount of damage they do, and like they can kill any unit in the game one on one basically. But the thing with demis is that they can still be countered in some facet. You can throw a 300 gold
You can
spear
target
unit
them
to
and
meat
surround and
shield.
kill them.
You can target them. You can fade Abuna them. There are counters to it. The counters to Spirit Leech and
Not
Lore
so
of
much.
Death, not so much, and the magic missiles especially. You can overcast a Gaze of Nagash from effectively across the map. And
Yeah.
if you get lucky, and this is another problem with magic in this game, is that it's kind of random. It's very random. So you could get hit by an overcasted Gaze of Nagash that does like 800 damage, and you're like, okay, that was annoying, that hurt, my lord's not dead. But you guys saw in the Bretonian versus Musial replay I uploaded 2 or 3 videos ago, the overcasted Gaze of Nagash from point blank did half of Lewin's HP on ultra unit size. He has like
Yeah.
8,000 HP on ultra unit size.
Yeah.
The amount of damage that spell did for what it cost me was ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous. And as soon as his general died, the mass wavering started, the routing started. The game was pretty much over from there. So
Yeah, Lewin just can't die for Bretonia. The army just instantly crumbles.
Yeah.
Well, not crumbles, but they run away.
yeah, so it's very the general sniping isn't fun to watch. And then yeah, from a spectator point of view, if you're watching these tournaments and you see someone a lord go down 30 seconds into a game, a minute into a game, why are you going to be interested for the rest of that game? You know how the
Exactly.
game's going to go.
Wow,
Like,
much skill.
yeah, wow. I Spirit Leech from really far away and killed him. Wow, that was exciting. No, it wasn't. So
Right.
we don't want that. So what we're talking about here is, well, there's a big problem, and CA's already addressed it. They said it's going to be hard to fix. It won't be in patch 1, but basically magic does not scale. Magic damage does not scale with unit size. I made that video about it. So if you're on small, a Spirit Leech can one-shot Grimgore Ironhide. If you're on ultra, it'll tickle him. So
Yeah, the magic and abilities are definitely not proportional to unit size, and they absolutely need to be. And I think that might have just been an oversight on CA's end. I definitely don't think that's intended, because especially when it comes to like larger spells too, right? And just how certain spells have an effect on the game. Like Fate of Bunja, for example, it will put demis to really low on ultra, but on smaller unit sizes, it just kills them outright. So I don't think that was intended from CA, but these are one of the things we really need to bring to their attention.
yeah, they said that thing is going to be hard for them to fix, but they are aware of it. It was in their Total War Reddit post. They have a long one. I'm not going to link it because I'm already linking a million other things, but you can find it on Total War Reddit. Sam went through a bunch of questions and answered them, talking about what may or may not be included in the patch. It wasn't super in-depth. It was very cursory, but there were some cool highlights in there. He mentioned that he understood that people want to see Avatar Conquest return, and he was like, that's cool. So there's some cool stuff in there, but yeah, he basically just went through a bunch of questions on Reddit and was talking about that. So we think that Spirit Leech and Fate of Buna probably do too much damage currently. They're not very skillful spells. There isn't a lot of downside to using them at the moment. Fate of Buna I don't have as much of a problem with because it costs 13 Winds of Magic. It's a very expensive spell, and it has
And the
a long
range is pretty short too.
Yeah, and it has a long cooldown. So that isn't so much of an issue. I think that maybe increasing the Winds of Magic, or as we say here, maybe reducing the damage by 15 to 25% couldn't be a horrible thing. There are downsides to something like that. It suddenly makes it a much less viable counter to Demigryph Knights.
But then again, Demigryph Knights are also part of the problem,
Yes,
right?
so hopefully the patch would address the Demigryphs as well.
So I think one of the things, yeah, right. So like piggybacking off of what you said about like Spirit Leech and all these direct damage spells, like Shem's Burning Gaze and like Fireball, Overcast and stuff, just doing way too much damage, and that also comes in for like Accuse in general, right? Like all these things are probably doing too much damage. But one of the more, I guess, interesting proposals that we had for Spirit Leech is that it should work more similar to the tabletop, because in Spirit Leech, it did damage to a single target unit, but what was really interesting about it is it did damage proportional to its leadership, right? So like the higher leadership you had, the less chances that Spirit Leech would do damage, and that was one of the proposals that we kind of shot forward. And we're like, hey, you should work closer to the tabletop because we have the lore justification behind it. But at the same time, I think it will also make it a very interesting spell because really unique to Lore of Death, because you can also play with Doom and Darkness and stuff like that to lower a unit's leadership before you hit it with something like Spirit Leech. But that kind of performance you would have to actually pay for, right? Right now you're paying seven wins of magic to do Spirit Leech, but it's doing way more than it should. So while we can increase the amount of damage that you're doing it, you still have to cast Doom and Darkness first, and there's just a lot more play, with the suggestion that we kind of put forward.
Yeah. Another suggestion that I've seen that I like and we've been discussing, I don't know if this could, I can't remember if Doug said this could even be incorporated, but putting a 20 to 25% magic resistance buff in the mount choices, quote unquote, for a Lord could mitigate some of the Spirit Leech sniping, could mitigate some of the Gaze of Nagash and Shen's Burning Gaze sniping, and basically allow these dismounted legendary lords like Grimgor Ironhide, who never see play ever because they have no mobility and because they can't get away from spells like Spirit Leech, it would make them more viable. So
you mean like my Sigvold with 0 kills and one of the
basically, yeah. So Sigvold doesn't have mount choices. Grimgor doesn't have mount choices. There are a couple others in there. They have no way of dealing with magic sniping. And they're melee-focused legendary lords, so they have to be in melee to do anything. And they're always going to be the first thing that gets hit by those magic missiles and by Spirit Leech. So it makes them super uncompetitive. It makes them super not viable. And who's going to bring Sigvold? Who's going to bring Grimgor? You're always going to bring Azag on a Wyvern because he's going to be able to cast Spirit Leech. He's going to be able to move around the map really quickly.
Yeah, mobility is key.
Yeah,
mobility is key because you can engage at will, and that's one of the things I talked about in one of my earlier Twitch episodes about the new mechanics that are going to be going to be introduced into Warhammer, right? And that's the premise of fast flying units. You're able to strike wherever you want. You're able to pull out of combat. You're able to chase. You're able to you just have, because the mobility is just so huge, and because you're airborne, you don't have to actually go through units in order for you to get where you want to, right? So that's why like these flying lords on Pegasus and on Hellsteeds are so important in the meta right now, is because they're able to reach out to the targets that needed to be damaged or have Spirit Leech or whatever cast on them. They're able to get that off, but they're also able to retreat and come back to your lines and be able to provide leadership buffs, and not to mention the other buffs that they have on them, right, that they can apply to the units down below. They can do that whenever as well. They're also able to fly behind units and instantly get a rear charge and apply that morality buff where they want. So mobility is definitely key, and that's one of the things that we're seeing in the meta, and it's pretty much driving the meta at the moment.
So what I wouldn't mind is maybe only giving legendary lords who don't have a mount choice that percentage damage resistance to spells. So someone like Manfred von Karstein on a Hellsteed, he's really fast. He can get away from you in some instances pretty easily, where he can get out of Spirit Leech range. And of course, you can overcast it. There's that kind of stuff. But he can, generally speaking, be where he needs to be on the battlefield. So maybe if we nerfed Spirit Leech a little bit, made the cooldown longer, and then gave only the melee lords like Sigvald and Grimgor that never get any play whatsoever, gave them that damage resistance to magic, that would certainly make them much more viable, allow them to go in and tank those melee engagements and make sure that they don't get sniped in the first 2 minutes of a game once melee starts. So I think that would make them a bit more viable, and it's probably a good change. Ethereal units are another thing that we should talk about for sure.
Mm-hmm.
They are not bad at the moment. Cairn Race in particular can be relatively viable. They're not actually a bad unit at all. I have seen some play in the competitive scene and a higher level play, but they do not necessarily perform as well as they should. That's a little bit up in the air, but certainly something like Hex Race. When you see a Fate of Buna go off on a Hex Wraith, you just
that
cry.
unit's dead.
It's literally dead, and And it's not necessarily a bad thing because look, ethereal units are supposed to be more susceptible to magic damage. That's what their
Hmm.
counter is. Accuse, Fate of Buna, that kind of thing. It should do a crap load of damage to an ethereal unit because they shouldn't be taking much damage to physical attacks. Now here's kind of where it comes in though. Currently, I think they do take a bit too much damage, and I think you agree as well. This was your idea that they take
Hmm.
a little bit too much damage in melee engagements. So you want to talk about their effective HP for a second? Just kind of
Right. So
explain Karn Race.
right. So, well, car race in every single Ethereal unit. So let me just give a like a brief lore introduction to kind of how Ethereal worked on the tabletop. Mundane units, which is I mean mundane weapons especially, which is basically every single other weapon type in the game except for magical weapons, or like those unique magical weapons that legendary lords and stuff has. They could not hurt ethereal units. So if you just had a simple sword, you cannot actually do any damage to ethereal units on the tabletop. So obviously, we don't want to have a game where you just couldn't hurt units, right? That would be completely over the top. So what CA did in their design for this is they made them smaller, they made them more expensive, but at the same time, they also drastically, increased their physical resistance. Basically, you could still do damage with them, but you couldn't do as much damage as you can to other units. However, they gave them no armor and they gave them really low health. So armor is another, and they also have really low melee defense. So like once they engage into melee, units are hitting them more. They're actually doing a lot more damage to them because they have no armor, even past the physical resistance. Because right now they have 75 damage reduction from physical attacks, but because their stats are so low, you're actually able to inflict more damage on these ethereal units than you otherwise should. And I don't think they're at a place where it's supposed to be. And because of the fact that they're taking so much damage because of their low stats, their effective HP is actually much lower than someone that would have higher armor. For example, like Great Swords, Black Orcs, and stuff like that. Because their armor is so much higher. They actually have more damage reduction and they have more effective HP compared to something like Karn Wraiths, right? So the way that I kind of envision this on the tabletop as well, from the tabletop as well, is when you compare how magic worked on the tabletop, you have someone casting their spells, but at the same time, the defending player also has a chance to stop them by throwing their dispel dice, right? So if you wanted to throw something like a 2d6 magic missile on top of my hex rays, I have a chance to actually stop you from doing that. On Total War Warhammer is not like that. You cast something like Fedabunja, where you cast something like Shenzhen Gaze on hex rays. It's going to happen. It's just going to happen. You're going to do damage to it. I actually have no response for something like that. So in that sense, we should consider that. Hey, look, if you're able to kind of like blow these units out of the water using magic, and there's nothing the other player can do. And if you're able to kind of kill them in melee because their melee defense stats are so low, then we should be looking at more of the damage reduction increase. And that kind of plays into kind of the next thing that I want to talk about, which is lords and heroes and magic weapons. But I definitely think that ethereal units right now are currently underperforming for their price. I think they fit within this very niche role for the Vampire Count's army and what really makes them unique as an army. But right now, currently, they are just kind of. I don't think they're there yet. I think their resistance to physical attacks should be a little bit higher. I proposed them going to 85% damage reduction compared to 75, but at the same time, they should also have counters in the form of magic weapons, which is what I want to talk about next.
Okay, so yeah, your suggestion here is that Lords and Heroes should have magic weapons, and this is, to my understanding, a reflection of how the tabletop game works. That most, if not all, of the Lord characters and hero characters in the tabletop have magical weapons. Is that the case?
Yes, yes. So basically every single named magic. I'm sorry. Every single named hero or lord basically has a magic weapon of some sort. It's very, very low probability that they do not, and most of the time when you're actually building your own lords and heroes, you will always give them a magical weapon as well. For example, my vampire lord always carried around an ogre blade, for that +2 strength, and basically, on the tabletop, lords and heroes were one of the strongest counters to ethereal units. Like if I wanted to, to do damage to like an ethereal unit, let's say that the other guy was had a wall of like Conrad heroes, or like more like another unit of Conrads to the side, and then he doesn't know how to deal with it. Yeah, sure. Except my one little hero over there with a 5-point magical sword is going to be able to go to town on these Conrads because, like I said, they couldn't be hurt by mundane weapons, but they were basically one-shotted by any by any hero. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because these epic heroes that you have in the game and these epic lores that you have, from a lore perspective, they're swinging their magical weapons, down, the ones that are passed down from generation to generation, where our family heirlooms, the strongest weapons in the old world, right? And all these magical weapons are sort of not represented in the current game, even though funny enough, like aesthetically, when you look at every single lord and every single hero in this game, they have glowing staves, wands, and like swords. Like everyone just has like a flaming burning sword, but yet when you look at their stats, they don't have magical attacks. And for me, this proposal would be to give every single one of these lords and heroes in the current game magical attacks. I think it would actually add some flavor to the game, and I think it would not only make it more consistent for how it is on the tabletop and also how it is in the game, in terms of just the artistic and aesthetic expression that they're currently represented, which is everyone has a glowing, burning sword, but also gives a direct counter to ethereal units. So if you have heroes in the game, you know where to put them, right? If you see Karnbrace on your left flank, you know where Lewin's most likely going to go, right? Or you know where your paladin, or like maybe your captain of the empire with his with whatever a magical weapon is going to go over there and to deal damage to those units. I think it actually it increases play diversity. I think it gives you more options, as the person that's fighting against the vampire counts, and I think it's the one thing that keeps vampire counts unique compared to the other factions.
Yep, I 100% agree on that one. And so moving on to this next topic, I think this one is, I think pretty much everybody who's played this game is in agreement on this. Big spells are drastically underperforming. The bombardment spells, the vortex spells in particular, are pretty trash across the board. So
trash that's a nice way to put it, I guess.
You look at Purple Sun of Xerius, you look at Banishment for the Lore of Light, you look at all this stuff.
Oh man.
You can get an amazing vortex. There could be the biggest, meatiest blob of zombies or skeleton warriors or whatever unit.
Just truly awful.
No flanking whatsoever. Just like the biggest blob ever. And you can drop your Vortex spell right on the top of that and expect to do about 400 damage per unit, which is equivalent to about like 5% damage to each unit. Maybe.
You can't, to the point where no one dies and the health bar barely changes.
Yep. Sometimes you literally don't see the health bar change when you see it carry through. So, as something like Purple Sun of Xerius, it looks amazing. Like, you see that sun go off, you're seeing units getting thrown all the way around. Oh, it's disrupting their formation. Ooh, what an amazing tactical... No, it's not a tactical advantage at all. They're going to get back up.
They're going to get back up and get back in the fight.
You can't time it so that somehow disrupting their formation isn't going to, like, get rid of their expert charge defense or something. It just doesn't work that way. I understand what they were going for, and I understand why they didn't want to make these spells so stupidly broken that they would just like obliterate entire units. I understand that. But currently there
it was on the tabletop.
Yeah, currently there are, I think, 2 Vortex spells in the game that do some damage. It's Burning Head is the best performing Vortex spell at the moment, and Flamestorm. And they're both Lore of Fire, and
they're both Lore of Fire.
Yeah, and neither of them are anywhere near amazing. What happens is most of the time you'll drop it on a unit,
expensive
and they're
too.
spaghetti. Yeah, they're expensive to use. Lots of Winds of Magic to use. And what you'll do is you'll drop it. Your opponent is spaghetti lined. It'll be on top of a unit or two for like a second or two, and then it'll veer off in some random direction and do nothing. For the amount of Winds of Magic you're using to cast this Vortex spell, it isn't worth it. You're so much better off going for, if you're Lore of Death, why the hell would you ever use Purple Sun? You're going to use Fate of Buna and Spirit Leech all the time. There is no reason to use anything else. So, if you buff the damage on these Vortex spells so that they're viable, then you're going to be seeing them more, and they are those hype, exciting magic spells that much more interesting to look at than something like Fate of Buna, where you just see purple lines rising from someone. Seeing that Purple Sun
that's exciting
go
too,
off,
though.
And
that makes me excited.
Seeing that Purple Sun go off and throw units around, that is really cool. You don't want it to be at a point where it's obliterating entire units easily, but at the same time, you want it to get kills, you want it to do real damage, and if your opponent is going to make a mistake like blob up really bad, and you
You
drop...
should be able to punish.
Yeah, and if you drop a big Vortex spell, like Dwellers Below or Purple Sun, I don't know Dwellers Below. Dwellers Below, that's not a Vortex spell, is it?
Okay, so that's a Lore of Life spell. So
It's like zombies coming up from the ground and like killing people.
yeah, you basically just get dragged
Yeah.
to hell or something.
Yeah. But anyway, so those spells should be able to do a crap load of damage to a big blob. If you're engaging properly, where you have one unit fighting one unit and you're not blobbed up, sure, Vortex spell gonna do some damage to whatever it hits, but it's not gonna be a big deal. But yeah,
But that's
again,
because, yeah, but see, to go off exactly what you said there, and I think that's our biggest problem with it right now, is because it doesn't punish bad play, right? You can blob up all you want, but you don't have anything within your magical repertoire to truly punish that type of behavior. The way that it spells right now. So let me just give you a little bit of lore background, right? So something like Purple Sun, obviously, in 8th edition, magic was horribly powerful. And what I mean by that is because when, like, you'll hear this term a lot from Warhammer veterans, and that's like, oh, you're just going to 6 dice Purple Sun. And what that means is, you basically throw a lot of dice. Well, what happens is, like, the way that the magic system works is that you take a bunch of dice and, right, you throw 6 dice at it, and then you can have a chance to get something called irresistible force, which means that the spell goes off no matter what, and you cannot do anything to stop it. You can't dispel it, you can't dispel scroll it, and the spell goes off. So the spells on the tabletop are extremely, extremely powerful. For example, if Purple Sun touches you, the model basically has to take an initiative test or be removed from play. Like you die, dude. Like, flat out. You're just gone.
what was Kolar's initiative? 1, 0?
Yeah, he's gone. so like Lord Masmanunti, for example, for the Lizardman, he basically rolls anything. If he rolls anything that's not a 1, he just instantly dies, right? So the idea behind these super big powerful spells from 8th edition, obviously we don't want to have something like this in Total War Warhammer, right? Because we actually care about the balance of the game, and we don't want to see an instance where units just get completely wiped off the map. However, we want to be able to be in the place where we, as the competitive player, or as, the player, even the casual player, any player, is looking at this gigantic mob of, like, great swords, and, like, obviously you can just really poor play, right? Like, just everyone stacked in the middle, and you can't punish it because these spells, even though they're there and they cost something like, 15 wins to cast, they're just not doing enough damage. So even when you have these circumstances where it really allows for that tactical play, as the magic user who brought a lord in the first place, so you can use these big spells. For example, right now, like, what is the point of casting any of these big spells, especially the ones that really, really should be the reasons why you're taking the lore in the first place? For example, as Lore of Heavens, the only thing that I end up casting from my end is harmonic conversions and Midnight Wind. I mean, like, in Midnight Curse. Like, why would I actually cast anything else? Because nothing else is worth it, and I don't think that should be the case. So in that sense, I think the spell should definitely do more damage, at least 25% more damage compared to what they are now. And I think we should also look into reduce their scattering, because, like you said, a lot of people run. It's not like the tabletop where, like, yeah, sure, you can reform and, you can form spaghetti lines technically and on the tabletop, right? But when spells hit you on the tabletop, you definitely feel it. Whereas right now, when they hit you, you barely notice it.
Yeah. And stuff like Common of Cassandra and the Lore of Metal bombardment spells, when they hit you, like, you literally don't see the HP bar move. It's literally like a pillow landing on your head. And when you see something as impressive as Gork stomping on a unit, or a comet coming down from the heavens to smash you on the head,
yeah, like,
you expect it to
aesthetically
do something.
Exactly. Like, right now, aesthetically, it doesn't even make any sense, right? Because you see these really big, impressive animations. The comet takes a long time. You can actually see the storm swirling above your head, right? So all this buildup and this huge buildup of excitement, right? But when the moment actually comes for it to perform, it does not perform.
It killed 0 dudes.
it really does, dude. You just go limp, right? So even from a casual player perspective, not even from a competitive player perspective, it doesn't feel good to either party, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, we got that. All right, so moving on to Demigryph Knights. This is an obvious one. They're an important part of the Empire metagame. They munch on pretty much any
Everything.
unit in the game. The Demigryph Knights with halberds for 1,400 gold. You can kill a giant easily. You can kill pretty much any monster unit in the game easily. and not take very much HP damage. You can munch on a Terrorgeist when it lands. You can munch on pretty much anything. I've killed 8,000 to 10,000 worth of gold in a single multiplayer game with 3 Demigryph Knights with halberds. So
when each of them are like at 120 kills, and most of them are from like Crypt Horror, like other important units.
Yeah, I've killed like 6 units of Black Knights, and then 2 Terrorgeists landed in there. My Demigryphs killed them, and then the Zombie Dragon came in, and Fate of Bunad, and I still killed the Zombie Dragon. They're pretty crazy. Now, let's be clear, that was my opponent playing the matchup really horribly and not understanding that Demigryph Knights will do that. And of course, you do not have to commit that many troops to kill Demigryph Knights. But they are currently at 1,400 gold, too cost effective. They should probably get a price increase and a little bit of a stat decrease. Now, what is important here is I do want to maintain the flavor of the Empire faction. I want to maintain the flavor of the Demigryph Knights. They are monstrous cavalry. They are supposed to munch on, even Grail Knights, even stuff like that. They are supposed to beat them 1v1. They're monsters. They're not riding horses. They're riding a tiger with lion claws with eagle beak and eagle claws, and like literally they're just carrying like some of the greatest knights in the entire Warhammer world into battle. They're supposed to destroy you. With that said, they need to be brought back a little bit more in line. So a price increase of about 200 to 300 for the Lance and Halberd units both would be good. We've been talking about decreasing their weapon strength a bit or their melee defense, just to bring them more in line with their cost, basically.
Yeah, so a little bit of lore background, right? So the Monstrous Cavalry were something that's kind of newly introduced in 8th edition for the most part. Monstrous Cavalry, just like we won't see them in the game just yet, but just to give you a little bit of more background, what we will see in the game probably in the future is more fun cavalry coming from ogres, and then we'll also see stuff like skull crushers coming to warriors of chaos, hopefully.
Please, God, give me my skull crushers.
Right. So these are the first batch of monstrous cavalry in the game. So to a lot of people, you might not understand exactly what their role is on the battlefield, but they are heavy shock, right? They're supposed to be like a lot of comparisons out there. They're literally supposed to be the heaviest of all shock cavalry. That's because they're not riding normal mounts. You're not riding a horse. You're riding a demigryph, right? You're riding a skull crusher. You're riding a morphang, right? These giant like bear cat things will eat you alive. But the one thing that really makes them different right now is because when you look at their stats, the way that the stats are portrayed in this game is that you can't just make the mount itself have armor piercing, right? You give the unit armor piercing, and the reason why Demigryph Knights with halberds are so powerful right now, one of the reasons why they perform so well is because not only do they have solid damage, but they also have an outrageous amount of armor piercing damage and bonus versus large, right? So all these stats have to be contributed into what makes this unit powerful. So one of the proposals the proposals that we actually pitched forward was that Demigryph Knights, if they are supposed to be these powerful monstrous cavalry, which they should be because they are, obviously these heavy shock and they're very unique to the faction. There's not a lot of this in the old world, right? Only some of the factions have this, and it really does make their flavor and make this faction really unique, but they have to pay for it, right? That's why we suggest either 1,600 for the lance and 1,700 for the halberd, and we also feel that the armor is a little bit inconsistent as well in relation to everything else. I mean, 130 armor is like, when you look at other, like, from the tabletop, right, the 1-up armor save. If you look at Rexguard, which also shares that 1-up armor save, why do they have more armor than them all of a sudden? Why do they have 130, for example? And then why is their melee defense so high, right? I understand that you're riding these demigryphs, but at the same time, they're also larger. On the tabletop, when you're a larger size, you actually, you're just easier to hit for the most part, right? Because there's just more, your base is a little bit fatter, so more things can hit you at that time. And we feel that right now, demigryphs they're overperforming, for their cost. We still want to keep the identity that is the Demigryph Knights, as monstrous cavalry, which is this rare special thing for the Empire, which is unique to the Empire. We really want to keep that feeling of uniqueness. We don't want to change the flavor at all. We still want to make them badass, but what we want to do is we want to make them priced a little bit more appropriately.
Yep. And this goes right into the Crypt Horrors as well. They're the other melee unit in the game.
They're like the infantry. They're like the monstrous infantry variant of Demigryph.
Yeah, they're, and honestly, I think that they might even be. Let's just for a second look at everything you get with a Crypt Horror for 800 gold. You get poison attacks, which I can't. They basically poison attacks in this game. They make your stamina worse. They do damage over time.
They put this debuff on you.
Yeah, I don't remember everything that's included in the debuff, but poison attacks are good. We can just get that out of the way right now. I should know this, but I don't. What specifically is?
They take more armor piercing damage. They move slower. They do less weapon damage. Like they also affect your vigor, which is basically like you get fatigued a lot easier. Yeah. So they're good. They have poison. They're good.
Yeah, they have AoE attacks. They knock you down on the charge. They can stun lock you. They can stun lock legendary lords. So if you go up against something like Ungrim Iron Fist, you're going to be bashing on him and continuously knock him down so that he can't attack you. So then something like, and this gets into a little bit more, but it gets into something like where the Slayer King is having trouble slaying monsters. Why? Why is that a thing? Why is Ungrim Iron Fist having trouble killing Crypt Horrors? Because he gets stun locked, because he gets knocked down and you can't get attacks off.
But they have the best stat in the game. They have armor piercing.
They have high regeneration, which means when you throw them in with skeletons or with zombies or other meat shields, their AoE attacks are going to be doing damage through the skeletons. You're not doing friendly fire damage. There's no such thing as friendly fire from melee attacks. But basically, you're kind of out of range of the enemy melee attacks. You're not taking much damage, and if you do, you're regenerating it because you're not throwing them in by themselves. They're tied in with other skeletons and zombies. And all the while, they're huge weapon damage, they're huge armor piercing, and those AoE attacks are going to work on the enemy. And it's just a lot of utility, it's a lot of damage, it's a lot of tankiness for a monster unit that only costs 800. This one's pretty easy. We think that they should go up to around 1,000 gold, at least, possibly even a little bit more. For everything that you're getting, we think that's a pretty viable price. And if they don't want to increase the price of the Crypt Horrors, then certainly decreasing some of their stats, lowering their armor, lowering their weapon damage are going to be important, because for 800 gold, you're getting too much of a good unit for that price.
It's an outrageous bang for your buck, right? Like, if you're paying 800 for the unit, well, now let's consider a few things, right? I'll once again, I'll do the lore justification. So Crypt Horrors are basically toughness 5, right? Strength 5. So obviously they hit hard, right? They have a lot of toughness, so that's represented in their health, of course. They have regeneration, right? They have multiple wounds per character, but the thing is, they're only weapon skill 3, right? They hit you, like, they hit other weapon skill 3 50% of the time. So while they were basically big, bulky dudes, they were unable to reliably hit you. What they're doing right now is, because they have the AoE in this game, and because they're almost like an anti-Cavalry for vampire accounts, because they have such high... The way that you do it is the vampire accounts player basically tar pits, like something like Demigryph, right? They tar pit it with a bunch of skeletons or a bunch of zombies, and the Demigryphs run into them and whatever and get stuck in the sea of undead flesh. And then you have Crypt Horrors, and they just go in and then just bash them over the head because you have 55 armor piercing and 18 normal weapon damage. Like, you just do a lot of damage. But the one thing to really keep in mind on, from the tabletop point of view, is they were essentially naked. They didn't have that much armor, right? In this game, they actually have armor. So not only are they fast, they have 51 speed, but they also do solid poison damage. They also have really, really outrageous weapon damage. And so, the proposal obviously is to look into their armor and lower their melee attack, either in terms of, weapon damage or the actual melee attack itself. But the big thing here is that they are currently overperforming. They are probably the best bang for your buck at 800 points.
Yep, absolutely. They're too good for what they cost. So yeah.
And also, there's no reason to take con wraiths when you have Crypt Horrors. You know what I mean? Like, for 50. Yeah.
But no, we can agree on that. And then there's nothing more that needs to be said about Crypt Horrors. They're a pretty ridiculous unit. And then so this one is something that we need to be careful on, right? Because one thing about balance, any kind of multiplayer balance or single player balance, is that you want to use a scalpel when you're going in and changing stuff. I've always been a proponent of incremental, small
Small.
balance changes over time that can over time get you to a much better place. The problem with Creative Assembly's balancing right now, and for all their Total War games, is that they'll usually come up with these big sweeping balance changes all at once, and then there will be like 2 or 3 months before the next real patch. The problem with doing that is that if they introduce something that makes gameplay worse, or introduce something that is bad for the game, it takes a long time to get fixed. Something like Dota gets updated very frequently, at least once a week. That just small, very iterative balance changes, incremental, that over time make the game much better. And then maybe 2 or 3 times a year they'll have a big balance patch that comes along. But Creative Assembly doesn't do this. They just do this one big patch and then wait 2 or 3 months, and then a bunch of problems arise during that time, or they overlook something in the patching process, and it takes a long time. This here is
that's kind of like also their studio mantra, right? It's kind of like they're known as a single player studio, right? They're known to make these big single player campaigns, tells a really good story and really brings to life the Warhammer universe through a single player experience for the most part. However, something like, you brought up Dota 2. Dota 2 is a competitive multiplayer tournament, like it is one of the greatest esports right now of our time. Like you have $1 million tournaments and all that jazz. So when you're in the public light for multiplayer, you have to be able to support it from that perspective. Creative Assembly, because they don't have the same amount of, obviously, this game is not targeted towards multiplayer in the first place, and the esports element is still like up and comers through like ESL and the stuff that you have been trying to raise attention to in the community. Because it's still up and comers, they don't have the obligation to really go towards competitive multiplayer, right? To really feed into the multiplayer community, because they don't need to. Patches from a software development standpoint, they take money, right? They take money and they take resources and they take development time and they take QA time and they take all that, depending on the complexity of the patch, they take a lot of resources in order for you to really, make these iterative processes. So for something like Valve and, Dota 2, for example, they are able to commit those
it's much more
those
viable
funds
for them than it is for
Yeah,
Creative
it's
Assembly. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's why the patch cycle is like that from a software development standpoint.
Yeah. No, it's true, because again, they're not a multiplayer focused thing, and it does cost money to do those incremental, quick week or 2 week, every 1 or 2 week patches that just keep coming out. That would never work for Creative Assembly. I'm sure that's why they haven't implemented it. But this next part about chaos is a bit of that sledgehammer approach, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but if you look at how chaos is performing in multiplayer and how often they get used, they need a relatively big change. So, what
I would say they get almost less play, like on a competitive level, than Britannia, which is saying something, because Britannia is not even done.
They absolutely do. Chaos
Yeah.
right now is possibly the Dwarfs, but I think Chaos gives them a run for their money, is the worst faction in multiplayer at default funds, which is large.
Yeah.
When you're at default funds, you cannot afford to field a cost-effective Chaos army unless you're doing something like spamming Forsaken. That is really the
which is a problem in itself.
Well, yeah, it is a problem in itself, because Forsaken was never meant to be the mainline infantry for Chaos. I think we all know what the mainline infantry for Chaos is supposed to be. It's supposed to be Chaos Warriors. And they are not used ever because they cost too much money and they're frankly bad for their price. So what we're saying here is that there needs to be some kind of change that allows Chaos to see more play.
Honestly, at the end of the day, and I think a lot of people would agree with us on this, is that currently Chaos units are just overpriced for their performance.
Yeah.
Like across the board, except for some that we brought up before, right? It's like stuff like the Giants, the Forsaken, the Hell Cannon is also quite good. Maybe like the Chaos Spawn is in a good place. But for the lack of a better word, like the entire faction is overpriced.
Yeah, and part of the problem, and this is something Reptilicus brought up when we were discussing it, is that the Chosen, they have really meaty stats. They have very good stats. But
very good.
They're like Chosen with great weapons, for example, 1,500 talents to field. That's very expensive. What do you get for that? Well, you get a crap load of armor, you get extremely good weapon damage, and armor piercing. These are all good things.
Like, you
But
have good stats.
how many men do you have in a unit?
80.
70, I think it's 75 at regular default.
Oh,
It's
right,
75
okay.
or 80, whatever it is. Whatever. They have less men in a unit than other units. True, that is how Chaos is supposed to be. They're supposed to be expensive and low in number, but very good. But the problem is they're already
both
so
right now.
overpriced that they cannot make up their cost. A chosen with great weapon unit will pretty much never do 1500 or 1500 gold worth of damage to their enemy. It's really hard to make up that price. So if you're already putting their price so high above other mainline infantry, and it's got great swords, look at how cost effective they are. Again, that's a problem in and of itself. Like, how are they supposed to make that up? They have low numbers, which means as soon as they start taking losses,
They also
their-
moved 28.
their ability to start killing stuff is going to drop much faster than any other unit. So there are a couple things you can do with Chosen. You can buff up their numbers a bit so that they don't lose men as quickly, so that they can maintain that killing power for longer in their round of combat, or you can just decrease their price. And
Yeah.
I think that it's clear that Chosen with great weapons, Chosen with halberds, these units that are more expensive than Demigryph Knights. Are you kidding me? There's no way. There's no way.
Right. So I think this fits under those two categories that we talked about, right? Like Horus. Wow. So
Horus Heresy.
chaos. Yeah. I don't know. I put Horus and chaos together, so I got chorus. Okay. So from a lore justification standpoint, right? Like chaos have some of the best quality units in the game, right? And the difference is, yes, they cost more, right? And because they cost more, therefore they should have less units. So the way that CA put them into the game is they kind of did both, right? And I can understand why they did this because, Chaos is a DLC faction. They don't want to seem like it's pay to win, right? I mean, honestly, I think everyone would agree when we say this is the safer route, right? Because imagine if Chaos was like all
OP.
powerful.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, and they would have been like, "Oh my God, CA would have got so much flack for that." So I think this is the safe route, but I don't think we're in a good place right now because of the fact, like you mentioned before, the smaller unit size is one thing. The smaller unit size, I think, already kind of demonstrates the rarity and the eliteness, right, of this faction. Like Chosen, for example, Chosen with great weapons, right? These are the highest ranked like foot infantry in the game, right? They are blessed by the gods. They're given all these different unique bonuses to basically make them kind of like the ultimate warrior, right? And that already kind of exemplifies that because they have 40 less dudes, right? But they have like 80 less dudes compared to someone else because they only have 80 80 models in that unit, right? So compare that to the fact that they also cost
An arm and a leg.
1,500.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think you have to go either one in this case, right? It's either you buff up the amount of guys that they have, or you have to you have to lower the price. It's really that simple. So I would almost say that, hey, look, like if the entire Chaos faction was like 100 gold less, like across the entire board, except for other, the stuff that we mentioned before, like the Giants, Forsaken, the Hellcannon, and the Chaos Spawn maybe being good. Like I wouldn't even flinch. I would say yes, let's try that, right? Even though that's a very sledgehammer approach, like you said before, which is something that we're obviously trying to, the direction that we don't want to go in, right? We want to take a scalpel towards balance, but in this case, the entire faction, and then I don't think you can say this about any other faction in the game. Across the board, I think the entire faction underperforms, and it's because they are overpriced, they're overcosted. So either we need more men in the unit to really feel like we're paying the correct price for it, or we need to lower the price if we keep the same amount of men. Do you agree?
I do. I completely agree. And I think that would make Chaos more viable, and it'd be one of those patches where you kind of see the effect it has on balance. And if it had I can't really imagine it having a massive, crazy increase on like the problems with Chaos. I don't think it would have a massive impact on campaign or in multiplayer. It would be good for Chaos. You're going to be able to, basically what it comes down to, you'll be able to afford one more Chaos Warrior and a couple more chevrons, or a Chaos Warrior and a dog, something like that. If you lower each price by 100, like you'll get about 800 to 1,400 more gold for a game, which is going to allow you to feel like one more Chosen. But where Chaos is right now, that is exactly what they need. That is exactly what they need. They need to be able to afford like one more decent or good unit to keep them in the fight for longer. So
Right.
I think it's not a bad decision. This would be one of those things where, again, it is Sledgehammer. It could be problematic. We could do a better job thinking of what Chaos actually needs. For right now, I think it's not a terrible balanced idea.
No,
Um,
no, honestly, I think like this would be a good way to approach the faction because I really think, with every single other faction, we can really pinpoint like which unit is underperforming or overperforming, right? But it's very rare that we can look at a faction as a whole and be like, this entire faction is underperforming, right? And I think the best way to do that is to really analyze what makes them underperforming, and it's definitely their unit to price ratio. So I think adjusting that in either way is the best way forward.
yeah, I think Greenskins right now are in a pretty good spot. In fact, I think Greenskins and Bretonia are the two factions in multiplayer where I'm like, this faction doesn't really need changes. Sure, Bretonian's going to get Holy Pilgrims with Grail Reliquae. They're going to get Knights, Questing Knights with Great Weapons, and Questing Knights, and they're going to get Knights Errant.
Yeah.
And they're going to get the Fey Enchantress. After
Well,
that, like where they are right now, I think
uh,
Bretonia is actually viable. They're not OP. They have
I mean,
aerial dominance.
yeah, sure, they're missing a few stats here and there, right?
Yeah,
They're
like
missing
the Grail
the
Knights
Grail Knights,
need
yeah.
their Blessing of the Lady. They need the 10% war save that Lewin has. That kind
Hmm.
of thing, which I'm sure will get added when
The
Bretonia
peasants will
gets added.
also the peasants obviously need encourage from knights that are near them, right? Because that's part of the lore as well. They are missing a few things here and there, but they're not in a total bad place. And the only thing that I can say about the Chaos faction is I think the Chaos faction has almost I think it even has more unit options than Empire. Is one of the most diverse factions in the game. I think it has a lot of different unique traits. It has the most monsters, that's for sure, right? But I feel like that's part of the issue in itself. Monsters in general are over. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. Monsters itself are a little bit overpriced, but Chaos faction just suffers from a lot of the problems plaguing this game, right?
Yeah.
And that's. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that.
So I wouldn't change anything about Greenskins right now. I wouldn't really change anything about Bretonia because I assume that they're going to get the right changes when they're officially added. They're going to get those new units. They're going to get the ward saves and the new
Mm-hmm.
legendary lord, Morgiana LaFey, the Fey Enchantress. But um, let's talk about dwarfs just for like a minute or two.
Yeah, I'm down.
Because we didn't have anything, we didn't send anything in patch notes to Creative Assembly because honestly, I had already spent a long time on patch notes. Dwarves do need something, right? They're never really played in competitive multiplayer at all. They're honestly not a very good faction at the moment. They're not horrendous. They can hold the line really well, and they do have some saving graces. They have the Runesmith buff. They're very tanky, but their lack of mobility does hurt them in the multiplayer setting. Some of their units, I think if I was gonna do anything off the top of my head with the dwarfs, I'd say that their elite troops definitely need a price reduction. Their Iron Drakes are way too expensive for what they do. Their Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes are way too expensive for what they do. Their Slayers are too expensive for what they do and way too squishy. And I understand that they don't have armor, so a Slayer should be squishy. But for 1100 talents, why am I bringing that unit? Slayers are not a viable unit right now. I think they should be, so you reduce that to 900 or 800, and I think they become a much more viable counter to monsters.
I also
And
think some of the units are also being overshadowed, like miners or blasting charges being so good, longbeards being good, and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, and they do have some good, like those blasting charges are a key component of the dwarfs. And
Yeah,
if you're running in from the front to a dwarf line, you're probably going to have a pretty bad time.
yeah,
But
you're gonna have an awful time.
yeah, they do get surrounded relatively easily, as you'd expect. They're dwarfs, they don't have mobility. I think their gyrocopters are kind of underwhelming. Could probably use a bit of a buff. There are certain things that they need. I think Iron Breakers need a bit of a price decrease as well for what they do. They're a great unit, but they, again, like maybe 100 less would be okay. But yes, dwarves do need something to be a little bit more viable in multiplayer. Again, what we want to try to avoid is making huge sweeping changes that will have a hugely adverse effect on campaign as well, because I understand that there are many people, if you're on this channel, multiplayer is probably your thing, right? Because that's what I do. I do multiplayer content for Total War, but they're all campaign, Creative Assembly, that's their focus, right? The campaign is as much as I hate to admit it, it is more important to them than multiplayer is. So we want to avoid making changes that would be really bad for campaign as well. And I don't think any of these suggestions so far would have a really adverse effect on campaign. Maybe the sweeping sledgehammer stuff with chaos price reductions, but even that, like, they still have really high upkeep, and you are always going to have a ton of money as chaos anyway to field troops. So I don't think that any of these changes we've suggested so far would be a big deal in campaign either. But
So I really want to say something about dwarves for a second, right? Like
yeah,
when you played in the competitive tournament scene for dwarves on the tabletop, right? And here comes me with my whole like lore and eighth edition background information. So dwarves are one of those key components that you have in every single meta, right? Because if you run into because monstrous creatures, right, and you know dragon lore, steam tanks, and all that jazz, they were actually like a thing on in competitive play. Like if you were one faction, and because there were so many different factions in Warhammer in general, and you really this is kind of like where we have to really expand our I guess expand our knowledge, right? And really understand kind of there's going to be 15 factions in this game, possibly 16, possibly more, right? It's this game is very unique in the sense that it's very asymmetrical. A lot of these different factions have their own strengths and weaknesses that are drastically different than someone else. Dwarves are basically on the far end of that drasticness, right? Like they don't have magic. They work on runes. They don't have cavalry. They have limited air units. You know, they like to stay still, but they're very very artillery focused. On the tabletop, when you played in 8th edition, artillery was extremely dangerous. Cannons were very very dangerous. You're looking at like, you know, you measure 10 from the back on like say like a dragon, right? You do a damage, a strength 10, you freaking roll d6 for damage and wounds, no armor saves. Like one cannon can kill a 600-point dragon on the other side of the table on the tabletop. In this game, one dragon would not be able to do that. I mean, sorry, not one dragon. One cannon would not be able to do that to a dragon, right? It just doesn't happen like that because this game works very, very, very differently. You know, aside from being an RTS game, the whole like damage, you know, to proportion to how the things interact with each other are very, very different. Which is one of the reasons why I don't think you see dwarves in competitive play. One of the reasons why you don't see dwarves in competitive play is because we don't see monstrous creatures in competitive play. The reason why we don't see monstrous creatures is because they are, you know, we believe that they're underperforming, right? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but the reason why you don't see dwarves is because you don't have the thorn in the meta complex that dwarves were on in 8th edition, right? The dwarves were basically the antithesis of someone trying to run big monstrous cavalry. Hey, you think you're a badass because you can run a lot of skull crushers? Cool, here's 4 cannons and I'm going to shoot at you. Like, that is why dwarves were strong on the tabletop. It's because they could answer these specific archetypes, these specific builds that other people could take in a competitive setting. You know, they might do really well against Skaven, or might do really well against like, you know, high elves, right? With this, you know, heavy monstrous build. But if they run into a dwarf setup, if they run into someone that's running dwarves in the tournament, they're going to hit a brick wall, and then they're going to lose and get knocked out. Which is why dwarves were an important centerpiece in the 8th edition competitive meta, on the tabletop, that is. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why you don't see them in the game, is because the meta is so different right now. You're seeing Lord sniping, right? You're seeing just a lot of infantry spam for the most part, and you're not seeing these monstrous creatures, what the dwarves really excel at killing. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
and you can't make cannons in Total War Warhammer kill monsters in a shot or two.
Yeah, you
It
just
doesn't
can't.
work. It
Yeah,
would
it just
not
doesn't work like
Oh,
that.
if I bring a Dragon Ogre Shoggoth, it costs 2,000 or 1,800 to field.
Right, nor should it work like that, right? You shouldn't have a cannon that instantly kills your monstrous creature. It just doesn't feel good. It's bad for the player experience, and I think that's one of the reasons why CA went in that direction, right? Because this is an RTS game. Things do work off of, you know, numbers and RNG and stuff like that, and it's just a different beast. It's just a different mindset.
Yeah. So we can go into that segue you were talking about with monstrous creatures currently underperforming.
Sure.
The suggestion we have right now is that monstrous creatures should have greater AoE or splash damage on their attacks, which means if you go into melee combat with a Dragon Ogre Shoggoth, the AoE, the area of effect, when he
I should
slams-
cry. Like I should be crying. Like
Yeah,
if you reach my line with a Dragon Ogre Shoggoth, right, and he's swinging into my line, I should be worried.
If I'm bringing a 2,200 gold unit to the field that has that much HP, it shouldn't be running in and getting spirit leeched and dying 15 seconds later. Like,
Two 300-point spears.
Let's be honest. It shouldn't be dying to really low tier spears with bonus first large. Now, let's be honest. Spears will always have a bonus versus large in Total War games. That is a perfectly fine counter. However, you have to do something with the Dragon Ogre Shoggoth, with the Dragon Ogres, with some of these other units, so that they can actually take on a 300 talent spear unit or 600 talents worth of spears and win. In lore-wise, I would not expect 2 units of spearmen to be able to deal with a Dragon Ogre Shoggoth very easily. I would expect them to do damage. I don't want my Dragon Ogre to be invincible in melee combat. There should be counters. Spears do have a bonus versus large, but at the same time, currently, Dragon Ogre Shoggoth is going to be losing to 2 of the cheapest spear units in the game when you send them in alone.
It's also because it's one.
There's no reason to bring
because of one unit.
expensive.
It's because you have one model, right? You have this one big model, right? And then it just gets surrounded, and all of a sudden you see his leadership drop. You see his combat performance drop because he's obviously being outnumbered. He's being stabbed from all directions, and that health pool that he has does go down, right? And that's one of the reasons why we think certain monstrous creatures are underperforming, is because they are just not threatening, right? When you see them across from the battlefield, like if you were on a tabletop, right, and if you see like 2 units of terror guys across the table from you kind of feel bad, right? You don't feel like you have a good chance, especially if you don't bring any kind of artillery, right? So AKA you're not playing dwarves, you feel a little bit more terrified across the table. I mean, that's the best way to put it. So I really think it's because the fact that monstrous creatures they're not threatening enough, and I think that's a good direction, right? CA, once again, I think they took the smart safe route, and they didn't make these giant monsters overperform, right? Because then you would have, if you didn't have unit limitations, you would have lists like Manfred with 5 terror guys. If they were doing a tremendous amount of AOE splash damage and doing a lot of great damage as well, because the damage that they do is quite fantastic. They're doing 300, 400 damage or whatever, weapon strength, and doing a lot of AP damage. The Terror guy has poison damage, and he's also has a lot of AP. But these are the things that we're kind of really alluding to, right? When you look across the table from you, when you assess the battlefield, like if I'm playing against Indy and he brings some monstrous creatures, I should immediately know that those monstrous creatures will pose an immediate threat to my line, and I should be directing a lot of my focus onto them instead of like the Lord sniping, right? I should be looking at those monstrous creatures as something, as a target priority, as something to get rid of, or at least like mitigate their damage. In their current form, they're just not threatening enough. If I see like a Shoggoth, for example, no, I don't care. I'll deal with it later. You know why? Because I can surround it with a bunch of top fodder units. It's going to get stuck in there. I'm not going to break because I outnumber him. So it's like, I don't need to worry about it. I don't think this is right. Like, we should be able to assess from the battlefield and see those monstrous creatures running towards me, because Indy paid 2,000 or 2,200 gold for these big things, and it's really troublesome for us to really say that, hey, look, what is exactly the right place for it, right? But we did identify a problem right now, and the problem is simply I'm not threatened by big monstrous creatures that we pay 2,000 plus gold for. And I think any direction that we go to fix that is going to be very important.
So I think another thing that could probably help monsters out significantly is their leadership. It's really common to send in a monster unit, and then it'll get surrounded. It happens to giants all the time. You guys have seen it in my replays.
And
they'll run in, they'll get surrounded, and then they'll just break, and they'll stop fighting, and their stats will go down because they're losing combat or whatever. They're completely surrounded, and then they'll just run away. And yeah, they might come back, but they've already taken a bunch of HP damage, and they're not doing anything. So there needs to be something sent in the game, not for all units. Certainly something like Troll should have low leadership, but a giant unit going in to the middle of a blob. If it gets, look, they're going to get surrounded. It's only one model. Like, of course they're going to be surrounded. There has to be something introduced to the game that isn't going to make them automatically, like, leadership plummet to earth.
Yeah, it's called stubborn.
So
once again, I'm going to drop the lore hammer here. So on the tabletop, right, there was certain units had stupidity, right? They have stupidity, they have stubborn, they have all these kind of psychological effects, because they're also like, they could be immune to psychology and all that other stuff, right? The entire point behind that is that when they do reach combat, they're literally too stupid to know to get out of combat. Like, they stay in there, they fight, right? And sometimes to the death, unfortunately, but it's just one of those things. But very rarely do they go, oh, hey, the way that also tabletop was balanced is the fact that monstrous creatures were so threatening and they did so much damage that even if you are outnumbered, you're still going to kill more of the other guy's models from that unit, that eventually the combat is going to break even, right? And it's just not the case in this one. You don't do enough damage to be that kind of threatening. You don't do enough damage to the 160 spearmen whatever surrounding you that for that to matter, right? But if you were able to kill, and this is just a wild exaggeration, but if you were able to kill like 20, 30 spears with like one swing of your thing, right? And all of a sudden, that's going to even up the playing field a lot more. You're not going to be surrounded with as many dudes. You're going to be immediately that centerpiece on the battlefield that's really wreaking havoc through the lines, right? So that's basically what I feel about monstrous creatures.
They just need a bit of a rework. Nothing massive.
A little love.
A little love. Yeah. And then I think the last thing we can talk about, because this has been going on for like an hour, 15 minutes so far.
Oh boy.
Yeah, we're at an hour 20 now. If you're still with us at this point, congratulations. This is more of a podcast style thing anyway. But so the last thing let's talk about is Cavalry. I think many of us would agree that Cavalry is a little bit expensive for what they do at the moment. They can be underwhelming. Now there are certain units. Personally, I've found that recently Grail Knights are in a pretty good place even with their cost. If they get their Blessings of the Lady, that 10% ward save damage reduction to all sources, that would make them absolutely worth their gold, in my opinion. When you look at, especially because the rest of the Bretonnian line is very cheap and cost effective. But if you look at something like Chaos, for example, Chaos has the same issue, and we've already addressed it. They need that 100 price reduction, but their Chaos Knights and Chaos Knights with Lances are super expensive for what they do. Obviously, they get absolutely raffle-stopped by Demigryph Knights. We've already addressed Demigryphs. They are just kind of underwhelming. Even when you get a really good hammer and anvil off, they don't really... And again, this is probably more to do with the fact that you can't field a large infantry line with Chaos either. An infantry line that's going to be able to give you that anvil that you need to hammer in from behind. But if you can't really afford to field a Chaos Knight army, or even 2 or 3 units of them, in your build without massively hurting the rest of your build, your infantry line, your monsters, that kind of thing. So we feel like Cavalry, that it's equipped with Lances, so the Chaos Knights with Lances, the Grail Knights maybe as well, certainly Knights Errant, or not Knights Errant, Knights of the Realm, those kind of things should gain an anti-large bonus, but have lower melee damage, because their charge bonus is still going to give them that killing power when they charge in from the rear, but they need that anti-large capability so that the Lance can, kill monsters, because currently they're not a fantastic choice against monsters. And the other problem with it is that the melee-based Cavalry just kind of dies when they go into combat. They will run in, and because they have pretty low melee defense, you'll just see these Chaos Knights that are running into, swordsmen, Empire swordsmen, and they're losing HP relatively quickly and dropping models and stuff. And if you're getting a hammer and anvil with Chaos Knights, you expect that to be horrifying. It isn't really at the moment.
Now, they're the way that we kind of envision it, right? Going back to in a previous Total War title, like Shogun 2, for example, right? Like, the reason why you bring Katana Cavalry, for example, is so they act like basically Chaos Warriors on horses, right? They're just more armored up. They have just higher melee defense. So you're able to get them stuck in. They have higher armor and higher melee defense, but they have that speed, right? They have less models, but you're using them to basically being precision-based Chaos Warriors. They're just faster Chaos Warriors. In other words, they get in there. You're supposed to leave them in there, and they're supposed to fight.
Like Katana Cavalry and Shogun 2.
Yeah, exactly. Like in every single, I think for across the board, every single melee-based cavalry right now is just not worth their points. Even the lance ones are not worth their points, because the lance ones, if you think about how their performance is, they just don't offer enough to the battlefield, right? They knock a few models over. If they don't have armor piercing is arguably the strongest trait in the game, right? So obviously we want to keep that unique to something like Demigryphs, because the Demigryph themselves, the hook beaks and whatever. So they have armor piercing, but armor piercing is what really, really, really makes a difference in the game. However, right now the current Lance Cavalry does not have that. I'm not saying we should give them armor piercing.
They do have armor piercing. It's just not. It's nowhere near as high as
they don't. Right. They don't have that trait. Right. That definitive trait that makes them 15 weapon damage and then 45 armor piercing.
Yeah.
They're not
they have
that.
10 armor piercing and 30 base damage.
Right. Exactly. So the way that I kind of envisioned it is that I think that the ones with the lances should obviously have a greater advantage versus cavalry. For example, if my cavalry with lances runs into your cavalry without lances, mine should be very, very victorious, right?
That's
Because lances,
exactly how that works in Shogun 2. So
and
Yari Cavalry will run over Katana Cavalry in melee, but
yes,
Katana Cavalry will wreck infantry units, so you've got that rock,
yes.
paper, scissors dynamic going.
Yes, so obviously I really want to push for the same thing. I also think adding anti-lodge in this game would actually give them a purpose versus and give them a more solid answer against like exposed monsters infantry or monsters, for example, if they're out of position, for example, especially with the flyers in this game. I think it really does offer that nice RPS system in the game, and I think anti-large will be the greatest way to give them that, while keeping them very, very uniquely different from melee cavalry. Because once again, the melee defense is something I'm pushing for the melee cavalry, and not to mention that yeah, the charge bonus is going to be high, but I want their weapon damage to be lower. So when you do, so they do have a very distinct difference and purpose to melee cavalry, and I think that will make the game just healthier overall.
Yeah. So these were recommendations for the game. They weren't patch notes, so you might have seen stuff like from Reptilicus that I've covered before. We've introduced patch notes before where we literally went in, did +5 attack for all Chaos Warriors, minus 12% weapon damage for all Demigryph units, that kind of thing. We didn't quite
Just
go
playing around
that far. This is tossing out ideas and well thought out ideas from people that understand multiplayer metagame, that understand what's going on and how to improve it. Doesn't mean that everything we've said is the best solution to the current problems in multiplayer. I'm sure plenty of you guys are going to have your own ideas, and definitely let us know what those are in the comment section. It's going to be something, especially if you watch this entire video, where I'll be very interested to hear what your guys' opinions on our suggestions were. Again, this was not us giving them the patch notes. This was giving them ideas and an understanding of what is currently happening in multiplayer and how to improve it. So the last thing that I want to say is, for this video...
Winds of Magic? Winds of Magic is inconsistent?
We did skip that.
Well, just really quick. I'm just going to cover it really quickly. But I don't think it's fair that when we enter the same game, right, that you start with 21 Winds of Magic and I start with 4. That's it. That's all that needs to be said. I just don't think that's a good game mechanic.
No, it's not. Because especially lore-wise, it makes no sense. Because lore-wise, if you're in the Chaos Waste, you're both going to have the exact access to the exact same amount of magic. It's just how you use that magic. In this game,
it's how
you're
draw
both
wins.
on Barak Var, the map, and the Empire starting with 15 Winds of Magic and you're starting with 4. Like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it's imbalanced and it doesn't work. Lore-wise, it doesn't work. There's no justification for it. This is something that I think they did address in the Reddit questionnaire. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think they did, and I think they said that they want to address that at some point. Don't know if it will be in patch 1. But here's the thing. If Creative Assembly doesn't go down the road of supporting multiplayer in this series, that would suck. I would cry. I'd be very upset. Plenty of us would. We want them to keep multiplayer alive and give us the content that will foster a multiplayer community.
Especially because there's 2 more games coming down the road,
So there's so much opportunity for Avatar Conquest to get added to Game 3, maybe after the game's been out for a while and all the factions have been released and they're like, hey, how do we keep this game going? Let's add an even more robust multiplayer suite. Now, of course, I'd much rather it come in Game 1 or early in Game 2 than have to wait 4 or 5 years for it to come down the road. But no matter what, yeah, look, we want the Avatar Conquest DLC. We want, or at least I do, I want to see those continuous features and continuous patching to improve the game and get the multiplayer meta to somewhere where we want it to be. With that said, mod support is in Total War Warhammer, which means if CA decides not to support multiplayer, we can get mad at them all we want, and I probably will be mad at them, but we have the ability to mod stuff ourselves. You guys know of mods like Dawn of War, Retribution, the Elite mod. We've seen Blade Balance for Rome 2. We've seen stuff like that. There's an opportunity for this game moving forward. If CA decides not to support multiplayer, or even if they do decide to support it, we can create our own multiplayer community that will improve balance and make it more fun. So we have some plans in the works at the moment. Nothing settled on yet. Nothing finished, certainly. But we're thinking that that could be a route we could go a little bit later down the line, where we go in and create the multiplayer game from scratch, get those stats going, those stat changes to improve stuff, to make it more fun.
Yeah,
So
it might even catch on from an ESL standpoint. So
yeah, so there's definitely the opportunity for that. I think that mod support is a really good thing for Total War Warhammer, especially for the multiplayer community. Obviously for single player as well. There's a ton of stuff you can do with mods, but just be aware of that. Understand that even if CA doesn't support it, we have other avenues we can follow to improve the multiplayer metagame. So that's going to be it for now. This has been a long video. I'm tired of talking. I'm sure Hero is as well. Thank you for listening in. And make sure that you show up tomorrow on the Total War official Twitch stream. Support us. Support what we're doing there, because we're trying to make multiplayer a bigger community. We're trying to foster that growth that will hopefully get CA to support our stuff. So again, it'll be a big deal. I'm hoping to get over 1,000 viewers. We had 886 consecutive viewers for the first stream. With my subscribers and there being more hype and better rule set for this tournament, I think we should be able to break 1,000 pretty easily. So please show up and support. Remember, it's at 10 a.m. EST and 2 p.m. GMT. So yeah, that'll start, and it'll be like a 4 or 5 hour tournament. Please show up, and I'll talk to you guys later. Andy Pride signing out for now. And then I do stop recording and replay buffer.